giving some error. I'm
No, no,
trying.
it's
Okay, it's
good.
come now. It's come. You have to say okay, yeah.
Okay, sir, it started.
Hmm. Hello and welcome to Outlook Talks. This is a series of conversations that we are having with interesting people, politicians, opinion makers, columnists, writers, authors, even singers, poets, etc. On the elections, which is we have just seen this very long drawn campaign that has just come to an end. So it's a lot of, we are trying to get varied people to come here and chat with us about what they felt about the elections, how the campaign was, how did they participate if they did, etc. So here we have today with us Senior Advocate Supreme Court Aditya Sondhi. Thank you very much, Aditya, for joining us. He's joining us from Bangalore. And we have Outlook editor Chinky Sinha, who's here, who's joining us here from Delhi. Thank you,
Hi.
Chinky.
Thank you.
So Aditya ji, jaise, like I was saying, so we've just seen this, extraordinarily long, phases of elections, the campaigning, the ups and downs, and I don't know, one would imagine this to be one of the most shrill campaigns of all times, in recent memory. Of course, it also ebbed and flowed. It kind of reached a pitch sometime, then they kind of, maybe people sort of recalibrated. But it's been a very vicious and vitriolic campaign from all sides. Though, and we do have a law against hate speech, a law against law for maintaining some decorum while making campaign speeches, while rallies. But no politician really seems to be much bothered about it. Is it that the law itself is too weak, that it has no teeth? Or is the laws are in place, but the implementation or the conviction of it is very poor?
Look, I think it's a combination of both these, coupled with the fact that there is a sense right at the top that one is beyond law. It's difficult for me in the short time that we have to get into the details of really how hate speech works, because it's not that we have one single hate speech legislation, and I think we perhaps should have one. But I'm going to answer your question in the context of electoral campaigning and hate speech, which is an entirely different scenario. Now, of course, many of the things that the leaders have said constitute criminal offenses, and there could indeed be penal action initiated against them. But that in itself is a long drawn process, and the damage is already done. I think the onus in these circumstances was squarely on the Election Commission to step in and issue appropriate orders or directions based on what was being said. It has been long said that the model code of conduct is only model, it doesn't have teeth, it's not enforceable. Those points are well made. But the fact is, there is a model code for a reason, which is to raise the bar, not to raise the pitch of venom and toxicity, which we have unfortunately seen. And all that it required was for the Election Commission to step in and show some impartiality, beginning with the Prime Minister, I'm afraid to say. You know what he said about a large chunk of our population calling Muslims Ghuspetiyon or infiltrators, I think is a very far-reaching statement to make. And if the Prime Minister can say that, then so can everybody else. And I'm afraid that the Election Commission, by not stepping in, has let it slide. And once that's happened, there is a sense that has gone around saying that, well, everything now goes. And therefore, let us not forget that outside of the criminal law, what we normally associate with hate speech, is there a large chunk of administrative and civil law remedies that are available. The Election Commission acts under Article 324. It has a constitutional status. It has been recognized to have the right to issue appropriate directions, circulars, strictures, as the case may be. And Mr. Qureshi, the former CEC, had once said, whenever there is a notice or a communique issued by the Election Commission pointing out the breach of a model code of conduct, one doesn't really care whether in the long run it's enforceable or not. But at that point in time, it has a psychological effect. One is upon the candidate himself or herself, that you better correct yourself. The second is on the voter and the populace, saying that something is being done. For the large voting community, nobody is really concerned whether ultimately a conviction takes place 7 years or 10 years later. Had the election commission acted now, at the time of the election, I think it would have just like a class monitor set the rules of the
Yeah.
game or reiterated the rules, and one would have adhered. And the good side of that, we have to be practical about this. The law can't solve every problem. The good thing with that would have been then the campaign would have shifted to larger issues of development, of economic, caste, of environment, which we're not talking about. Delhi is close to 50 degrees, which is why some of us have escaped the heat.
to
And yeah,
to cooler climes, yeah, like Bangalore.
that's right. That's right.
And one question I had was that there was a Supreme Court thing where they said they wanted people to come back with a reply. Now, these kinds of things, as you rightly pointed out, take a long time and the damage has been done already. But what gives them this agency or wherewithal to come up with these things? Now, if there was a fear of law, or let's say, as you said, law cannot solve all these problems. But if there was something like that, they would still, I mean, why have we lost this kind of fear or a sense of decorum or whatever? Because people are on all the sides are going on making these kinds of speeches and nothing comes out of it really. So how, I mean, I just wanted you to answer that question as to how, why are there any loopholes like that or what is it?
I think our discourse has changed over the last decade or so. The discourse has become increasingly toxic, and therefore it's like a shifting goalpost. At each stage, one has tested the waters, gotten away with it, and felt that you can always say or do more. Just today, I was looking at a file of a case which is pending before the High Court in Karnataka, where a television journalist, in the context of this election, had shown, the Hindu populace with the Indian flag and the Muslim populace with the Pakistan flag.
Yeah.
This is then a question for journalists as well. The law was pressed into service by a private complaint saying this incites hatred amongst communities. That trial will go on. I won't comment on the case per se, but the fact that one can do that today, I think is a point of self-reflection that how far have we gone? Are we saying today that the Muslim community is alien? In fact, many times, if you saw the recent conversation that Mr. Harsh Mandar had with three prominent Muslim scholars and thinkers, and what really struck me was that at the time of partition, the entire Muslim community had the choice to go to Pakistan if it wanted to, and it did not. And in fact, there was a reverse migration. Many of us are from migrant families who moved into India. Now, people who have lived with us, before us, in many cases, as our own, to be suddenly, othered, to be polarized and shown in this light, I think tells you how low the public discourse has gone. And people are lapping it up. I think a lot of this is also playing to the gallery. With the larger question, this may not be a straight legal answer, but the question is, why is it that a lot of us, our society, are reveling in this?
That's true. That is, I mean, why is there need for this kind of speech at all?
Precisely. Because there are takers for it.
Yeah.
And from whatever sense I get, there are people who want to vote along those lines. Even today, after 10 years, for a large chunk of the Indian populace, the issues are still centered around asserting a majoritarian Hindutva identity. I thought by now we had done it. After 10 years with the temple in Ayodhya, with everything else that has happened, the conversation around the Uniform Civil Code, etc., I thought by now the discourse should have moved.
Aditya, it's not actually, I mean, this is, of course, one major area, but if you look at local state elections, this kind of vitriolic speeches, I mean, it's not only about, one or two instances like this. It's say, I mean, to call Sanatan Dharm dengue, like a dengue, for instance, in the South, I mean, which is also not very, that also, I would say, it does constitute as a sort of hate speech. And so this, and so there are, the various things. Say in West Bengal, I think the campaign there has been very, very shrill between both the both the parties there. So this the example that you took of a election commission should be like a class monitor. There, if a student misbehaves, there are punishments, like he or she can be taken out of the class, can be rusticated, there are grades maybe downgraded, etc. So here, are you saying, what you're saying is the laws are there, but the election commission must step in and impose them, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And what about the other thing I wanted to ask was there's this whole anti-national thing going on, right? So if you question anything or if you say anything, for instance, you are always afraid that a case will be filed in some court or the other. And what is this anti-national situation happening? I was in Kashmir, and a lot of people have these PSA and UAPA cases against a lot of journalists, actually. So there's also this I don't know. I mean, I have a feeling that both of them are going side by side. Suddenly you are supposed to be accepting this kind of speech because otherwise you are branded as anti-national. And there's a fear factor where if you are indeed anti-national, then you will have to fight these cases. And a lot of people like us, we are, we have all these cases around us, like Outlook is fighting certain cases. So what is going on and what is this anti-national situation, where
Look, that's a separate question as regards the offense of sedition, essentially. And
Yeah.
for the longest time, the law has been settled by the Supreme Court that unless there is an overt call of violent revolt against the state, really sedition doesn't arise. And reading or writing literature or making statements per se, which are not to the liking of the establishment, does not constitute sedition. But in the new criminal law bills, which are to come into force in July, the law on sedition, if anything, has become even more vague, and it will be used by any government to its advantage once it comes into force. And that has become the stick to beat people with. But to return to the obligation of the political leaders themselves, other than the election commission, if the commission doesn't act, it doesn't mean that people and institutions are bystanders. And from what I understand, there was a petition moved in the Supreme Court also for the
Yeah,
court
High
to
Court.
take action. That was rejected.
Yeah.
Therefore, yes, the sense is that there are different sets of standards for leaders, for consumers, and for journalists and activists. And I'm afraid that if that is the perception, that is true. In the state of Karnataka itself, even in state elections, the last election that took place here, a lot of the campaigning was around these lines. The whole hijab issue, as you know, arose from Karnataka. There were other issues that I don't have time to go into right now, but a lot of campaigning there also was on those lines. So ultimately, I suppose it's for the voters to decide. The voters in Karnataka said, look, we don't want any more of this. I don't know if that is still the view that the Karnataka voters hold. We'll see tomorrow. But at least in the state election, it proved that you can push those buttons to a point and no more. And I think that was very revealing. And therefore, what I'm really trying to say is that in the electoral context, it's not the law that's going to be the solution. I think the solution is also going to be an awareness and a moral position that voters will take. Ultimately, this campaigning is done really with a view at the upcoming election, right? After that, one would hope that the heat dissipates and you get back to business as usual. But I do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think, till the time the people, the voter does not reject this kind of discourse, this kind of campaigning, that's the only way. I mean, there may be 100 laws, you may enact even more so, but yeah, the message should really actually be from the voters.
No, that is true. And also, I don't know if the heat ever dissipates because it's going on for a while. So only in that context, we also wanted to ask about this one nation, one election, the situation that is, see, they're going on talking about this oneness, So I was in Coimbatore and they talked about this language situation. Obviously, the opposition then came in and talked about how language is very important to Tamilians. And, there's the discourse quality obviously has gone really bad. But But the fact that this whole oneness situation, how legal is that? And that has also emerged as a campaign thing. Like there are 4, 5 things, like Article 370, the abrogation, which is highly debatable. That is echoing across India in terms of a campaign thing. And in Kashmir, obviously, the situation is completely different. They are saying that if elected, whatever, we will take it to the parliament and we'll say that restore Article 370, because that's about dignity and all of these things. Now, a lot of people don't understand the background of Article 370 and the abrogation, all of that. But just in terms of the oneness, in terms of the constitution, how does it work? And how is it that people are not really aware of? I mean, journalists can do so much, lawyers can do so much, but what else can be done to kind of make it, more logical, or at least people apply reason to understand these issues?
I think at the heart of this question is what is our constitutionalism all about? It's all about diversity, and it's all about recognizing choice and recognizing the fact that we're a union of states, that we have completely different linguistic, ethnic, geographical, food, caste, marital, and other such diversities and choices inbuilt to who we are as people. And therefore, actually, our polity should reflect that, right? It doesn't. You brought up language. Now, the new bills that I mentioned to you, the criminal laws, codes that have been enacted, all three of them have Sanskrit nomenclature, which is to a lot of people a sort of a superimposition. It's not that the laws themselves are in Sanskrit or Hindi, they're in English. But this posturing is telling you that there is now suddenly only one language to be spoken in the country. And this is really making people uncomfortable because it is eating into your sense of freedom, right? Having grown up in the South, I know how culturally different we are, but that's not to say one is less Indian or one is more Indian. You brought up Kashmir and Article 370. Of course, the Supreme Court judgment on the point right now is final, subject to what some other government chooses to do. But look at what's happening in Manipur. Is that conversation happening? How far do we have a constitutional diktat running there? So to say the Northeast is culturally very diverse and different from the rest of the country. So to suddenly now say that we will have one election, which was your question, I know requires a constitutional amendment. It can't be forced through without it. And even if it is part of this larger program of saying we are not just one, but we are kind of uniform.
Yeah,
right?
like homogeneous.
Which I think is the antithesis of our constitution.
But Aditya, the argument for something like this is that we are a country which is perennially in a state of elections. We are there is there are assembly elections, there are this election, there are panchayat elections, there are municipal elections. So the argument is that first, of course, the cost involved, and two, I think the the legislatures and the policymakers are so much involved with this electioneering that their real job of policy making or legislator or law making is getting hit. I mean, that is the this is the argument for so that you have just this one election once in 5 years, and the rest of the time you can devote to nation building.
But sir, this presumption itself is flawed. This assumes that the needs of the states and the country are one, when they are not. Therefore, a person may vote, as I wrote in an article for you some months ago, a person may vote differently at a state election and vote entirely differently at a general election, at a national election. Because Which they do, and they should. That is the diversity. When the Election Commission speaks of a festival of democracy, in fact, according to me, this is the festival. If the states are involved in elections at different points in time, they're approaching state-centric issues differently as opposed to a general election. That is the festival. So these administrative and other reasons, or if I may call them excuses, actually betray the overwhelming intent, which is to say we're essentially one. And the problem here then is you're beginning to vote in a unitary way. That is then again doing away with the diversity. I think the charm of our constitutional democracy is that you can have different governments at state level and a different government at the union. They operate then as a check and
Correct.
balance upon
But
each other.
But the one nation, one election, it doesn't. I mean, you may vote differently for your assembly, and you vote differently for the Lok Sabha. That can still happen in with one nation, one election, right? Like for instance, right now we had assembly elections for Andhra Pradesh
Andhra
and
Pradesh.
Odisha. So it's just that more and more such I mean, almost all states would be voting that. Isn't that the point?
But look, that is putting a premium on the voter. You expect a voter then to be able to calibrate to that extent. When you're going in to vote for a state election and a central election, let's not lose sight of the fact that in the process of all this, the everyday voter is likely to get brainwashed into believing that this is one election, right? As it is, voting is such a vexed process. Some people I speak to talk about voting for their, the individual they like at a general election, when actually, honestly, that doesn't count at all. You're voting in an ideology or you're voting out an ideology. It's not a club election or a municipal election where the individual per se matters, right? So
Right.
we're talking about party democracy. So I'm quite uncomfortable with that, to believe that these elections can go on parallelly and that voters are then in a position to calibrate indirectly and psychologically. It brings a pressure on the voter to say, look, since it's one election, your better chance is to have the same party in power.
But there have been instances where simultaneous elections have happened between the state and Lok Sabha, like say Andhra Pradesh.
Earlier, I think 1969. Prior to that,
No, not that. I'm talking about like now, like say in Andhra Pradesh this time. The people have voted differently for the state, for a certain regional party maybe, and for the center, for a different party. I mean, don't you think our voters have that discerning?
Look, sir, that has not happened in a one nation, one election context. Let's be clear. Those have been
Correct. It's
exceptions.
happened.
That's right.
Only few states.
That's right. And they have been exceptions. They have perhaps been coincidences. But the moment this becomes the rule of thumb, I would be very interested to see what psephologists and other experts make of these voting patterns globally. I think then the revelation will be there that a voter may not then be in a position. And what you're doing indirectly is, I think, is tinkering with that choice. And it will also have its impact on regional parties. We will go down this route where you have only one or two dominant parties contesting the elections. The important role that the regional parties will then begin to fade. When the whole conversation today, when you speak of an opposition today to the NDA, you speak of an opposition in the context of a coalition. I don't think anybody is expecting the Congress to be the single largest party forming the government by itself. I think we move past that. And there is a lot to be said about coalition governments and how they represent the diverse and regional interests. So that's
and what Chinky had brought up, from 1952 to I think 1967, we did have the elections were won. I mean, both for states and Lok Sabha. So, what was the experience then, or have we moved? I don't think there was so much of coalition politics at that time. Now there are so many regional parties which have come up. So, is that the difference between 67 and now?
Of course, and don't forget that it is only after 1967 that you had emergency. It's then that you had the fall of the Congress, which was otherwise the single dominant party. The very birth of the BJP, I think, is attributable to that.
Yes.
So to use that early phase of our history as a justification, I think will be slightly skewed. We need to look at...
that's a good point. So you're saying that if suppose we had continued like that, a party like BJP may not have emerged.
It's quite possible. And this is creating the room then for basically a single party governance.
party system.
Yeah. Yes, yes. Chinky.
Yeah. Oh, I had a couple of other questions before we run out of time. The one is the constitution itself, because that has been questioned a lot. People have this thing that the constitution will be taken away. Some people are alleging that. Some people are then saying the constitution stands. But there is there's a problem which has been there with the word secular. Now, we did one issue on secularism as well. Now, we asked this one other panelist also about what Indian secularism means, in terms of the constitution. Is it like we respect all religion, or state has no role in terms of supporting or like whatever going against any religion? What is it? Which model is it? And how does it work? And I'll ask the second question also in one go so that you remember to answer that. See, the other thing is that suddenly we have, and this is personal in the sense that we are also looking at a lot of these cases. Suddenly we are very afraid, right, of saying anything, of writing anything, and Kashmir is one example where you even like a Facebook post, you are arrested, right? Or you're taken away, and then you're dealing with these cases where the amendments in PSA and UAPA have made it possible for them to be sent outside prison, outside Kashmir, like, so for example, somebody is in Agra, somebody is in Mathura, it's a mess. So there is that also. So how does the court, or like how do we navigate this situation with the media currently? Like today we had a Z TV conference, like a press conference where they talked about our government not letting Z TV, kind of do the broadcast in
Function in
Punjab.
Punjab, yeah.
Yeah, so that is also happening on either situation. One party says this, the other party says this, but the media, some media, we are under a lot of this pressure. So the first question is constitution. Does it still stand? What about this fear? How does the constitution protect? There have been mentions in many, one magazine also about Rahul Gandhi holding this little red book, which is also kind of like strange because that's the constitution, right? So, and the secularism question. I think I've asked too many.
No, look, thankfully the constitution stands and it shall, but it is obviously vulnerable to being tampered with. And that has happened historically, and it may very well happen again. This is where the court's role becomes absolutely paramount, because the power to amend the constitution, forget about drafting a new constitution, I won't go that far, but the power to amend the constitution is vested in parliament. There's no two ways about it. And that is a power that is actually inherent in a sense, and it is expressly provided under Article 368. But that power has now come to be fettered. And it has been fettered not by political parties themselves, but it has been fettered by the interpretation by the court, by what we call the basic structure doctrine, which is to say that you can amend, but you cannot destroy. And therefore, any amendment must sit well with what the basic essence of the constitution is. But the point is that is in itself a fluid test, because as to whether something is the basic structure or not is for the court to decide. And therefore, the onus shifts heavily upon the discretion, the interpretation, and the prejudices that the judges on the bench bring to the question. Now, secularism in itself has been recognized to be part of the basic structure. What is it in long and short? That the state itself has no religion, and by itself does not associate with a religion, while recognizing and preserving the right of its citizens to follow, practice, preach, and propagate any religion of their choice, and to set up religious institutions in that direction. But I am afraid that today, even speaking for the constitution has begun to alienate people.
Exactly. That's what I'm asking.
When you say, I stand by the constitution and I want constitutional principles to be preserved, people will turn around and call me a left liberal, or they'll say, "Acha, aap Congress ko support karte hain." But the point is, our politics for many of us is not party-facing politics. It's a political commitment to a constitutional ideology, and which party preserves it ought to be in power. Parties that don't respect it then have to be shown the way. But that discourse has changed, which is why even if somebody holds the constitution, they get trolled for it. And that's very disturbing.
Yeah.
I cannot see why we cannot as a people accept a popular government in place which is compatible with the constitution. We should actually rejoice that. But we are
Right.
now drawing these lines. We have these binaries that it's this way or the other. Suddenly the constitution is being seen as foreign, as colonial, as alien, etc., which is most surprising because that is the hard fought common document
Yes.
that we have achieved upon independence. Otherwise, our whole identity as an independent nation was in question. And this was the sole unifying factor. The
Yeah.
other part of your question, Chinky, which is about the fear factor around cases, of course, it's real. Governments across, across time have abused terror law, have abused sedition. But again, I think the focus is heavily upon the courts. Today, as you know, getting bail in many of these cases is a practical impossibility.
Impossible. People have spent years and years. I mean, and also see what happens is that then people get really scared. So we went to Kashmir, nobody would talk to us on record because there are repercussions. So this kind of, where do you go? Like, so
And
suddenly
many of
is
these
there the
offenses.
doubt that when we go to the courts, we may not be able to.
No, and that's where I think the phrase, the process is the punishment has proven itself true now. That if you're going to be incarcerated for 5 years, 6 years, and then get bail, you're already damaged. The
Right.
damage is done. Thereafter, whether you're acquitted or not is besides the point, which is why today the Supreme Court is flooded with bail petitions. I've said this repeatedly. Never before has the Supreme Court seen this volume of bail petitions and this much of a premium or an importance on bail jurisprudence, be it the Money Laundering Act, be it UPA, be it cases of sedition, be it cases where bail is the exception like NDPS and not the rule, and you're then always fighting against the grain, and therefore that is a stick for the state to beat you with, and I'm afraid that is the reality of it. Trial courts are more and more hesitant to grant bail in such cases. Your odds of getting bail even in the High Court may not be bright, which is why you have bail petitions listed before every bench every day in the Supreme Court. This was not the case earlier. And therefore, that means you are really shifting from concentrating upon your defense, concentrating upon an acquittal, or getting a complaint which is frivolous quashed, to really first arm wrestling
Just
for
get the
liberty.
bail,
For liberty.
Yeah.
I also feel that the executive is taking over legislature and court and everything else and making laws, and then kind of whether you challenge them or don't challenge them, whatever. Is that how it happens? I don't know. I'm not an expert, but is there a thing in the constitution itself where this kind of thing?
We have very clear demarcation that
Yeah.
it is Parliament that legislates, it's the executive that implements, and it is the court that interprets and decides. But those are many times shifting sort of lines. People have accused the court of getting into legislative arena, and the executive does have power, no doubt, to issue administrative orders, especially when there is no legislation in place. The Constitution permits executive orders to be issued to fill that lacuna. Many times they partake the nature of substantive law. Even the circulars that the Election Commission issues. For example, you brought up Andhra Pradesh, sir. Just this morning, I argued a case relating to a circular and its enforceability, which was issued by the Election Commission, which provides for repolling and scrutiny when there is an allegation of booth capturing. Everything is not set in stone. Everything cannot be in the statute. And as you know, amending the law is difficult, which is where circulars, administrative orders actually become very important parts of implementing the law.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah, that's true. Thank you very much, Aditya. It was a really very interesting and, very fascinating discussion, I thought. Thank you very much. It's, of course, I mean, we can go on, unfortunately,
go on.
time constraint, but very, very invigorating conversation with you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chinky.
Thank you, Satish ji. Thank you, Aditya.
Thank you very much
for listening or hearing, watching us. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.